Hello everybody and welcome to what's hopefully the one-stop shop to help you figure out what build can go farm all of the new terror zones so that you can make sure that you have the gear that's necessary and the elements that you'll need to be able to handle the monsters in that area. Walking into patch 2.5 or latter season 2 of Diablo 2 Resurrected. And now just before we jump in, consider leaving a like and a comment on this video as well as subscribing to the channel if you haven't done that already. We're on a massive push right now. We just cracked 7K subs and I think we're already close to 8K and that was within a month. If we can keep up that momentum, get all the way to 10K, I'm almost positive that the Illuminati have to invite me into the club and give me their secrets and then I'll be able to share them with you. Sorry, what was that? I may not be able to share them with you, but it would still be sick if we could get there. Thank you. Now, just a massive shout out to the community member Warren who did the initial data pull for me, grabbing all of the monsters with all of their relevant resistances and also using a lot of logic that they coded into their little program to be able to determine some of the types of resistances that can break monster immunities. So again, thank you so much, Warren. I myself then put 9 hours of work into this data sheet, but without that initial push, I would never have done this. So just thank you so much. Just as a quick note, the conditional formatting got a little bit messed up. I'm not exactly sure why. So the color coding isn't 100%. You want to look at the values in the actual cell itself as opposed to relying on the coloration. But I went and cleaned all of that up and just pulled all of the results out so that you don't even have to look at that first page unless you want to. But what you're looking at here is a complete breakdown of every single terror zone, capturing how many monsters are considered immune and what sources you would require to break those immunities on an endgame build. This is broken down by each individual resistance, capturing every possible source of lowering of a monster's resistance in the game, excluding wands of lower resistance. While you could definitely use those in the early game and people are already using those in a lot of different places, I don't consider a wand of lower resistance to be an endgame build item. So the lowest quality minus enemy res option is going to be something like a plague to apply lower res. And then for all of the people who have been asking the questions, which I think were a really good question, is what is the undead and demon density in each one of these areas? And are any of the magic immune monsters also considered undead? So I actually captured that here as well, including the percentage of monsters that are either undead and or demons. So how do you read the table? And also I'm just going to give you my highlights, the information that I found that I think is relevant. First and foremost, next to every resistance, there's going to be a column that just says, do you need negative resistance to be able to kill a monster in this area? So using Bloodmore as an example, there is a single monster that is immune to fire naturally that you would need minus res to be able to do damage to them. Then going from left to right between these columns here, we include every combination of potential minus enemy res, starting with the weakest, just having a plague apply lower resistance. Then you have a max level necromancer apply their lower resistance. If the character has infinity available on them or their mercenary, whether or not it's a character using infinity with a plague as well, either on the mercenary or on themselves, whether or not you're a paladin running a max level conviction, so think of a Tesla den here, whether or not you have conviction or a maxed and a plague, and then lastly, the strongest possible options for breaking monster immunities. This is a max level paladin conviction with a max level necromancer lower resistance. The last line here just says whether or not the resistances in that area are completely unbreakable. And this is probably the biggest dead giveaway for whether or not you should ever bring this type of damage build into that area. Reading across the board, again, using Bloodmore as an example, there is a monster that requires minus enemy resistance before you can begin dealing fire damage to it. And at the point of applying plague, there are no longer any monsters or 0 monsters that now require additional minus enemy res. This means that with just plague, you would be able to completely farm every monster type in the Bloodmore once it procs. I think what people are typically expecting for something like this is whether or not infinity is going to break all the resistances in that area. So if you just want to look at the infinity column of each damage type, you'll be able to get a better idea. Just keep in mind that infinity only reduces fire, lightning, and cold damage, whereas stuff like lower resistance will also reduce poison. And then for physical damage, you either have decrepify or amplify damage. And then lastly, magic damage, there's no way of reducing it. The holy bolts from a paladin are able to deal damage to magic immune undead, and we have that data all the way at the end. So out of the 81 zones that are available to be terrorized, just having an affinity and trying to deal fire damage will gain you access to 60 of those zones. So now that you know how to read the sheet and how to find the information that you need, let me just go ahead and show you the concentration of areas that you can farm per element, even if you had no sources of minus enemy resistance available to you. So if you're a fire build and you don't have access to any forms of minus enemy resistance, you'll be able to farm 25 out of the 81 zones that can be terrorized. You are able to farm multiple zones in every act other than Act 4. And then other than the typical area level 85 zones that you could already be farming, places like Mausoleum in the Crypt, I would just want to point out a couple really good spots for you, which would be the Stony Field, obviously a secret cow level, Alrash's Tombs, which are a huge benefit because they were already good enough to farm and now they're going to be better than area level 85. And then a place I think is going to be slightly slept on for a little bit, but the sewers down in Act 3. For cold damage builds, if you have access to Infinity, you'll be able to farm 40 out of the 81, or roughly half of the total terror zones. And if you have no sources of minus enemy resistance, you'll be able to farm 33 of the terror zones. I'd say most notably is going to be the tower as well as the jail levels. These were already really great places to farm. Awesome places to get high runes with a lot of unique packs that are able to spawn in them. Being able to farm Tristram as well as the cow level is a huge boon as well. And then the Stony Tomb in Act 2. Just keep in mind that cold is very restricted in places that they are able to farm, even with Infinity. For lightning builds, you're actually able to farm 77 out of the 81 total zones if you have access to Infinity. Now the flip side is if you don't have access to any type of minus enemy resistance, you're only going to be able to farm 21 of the areas without running into some type of immunity. But the moment that you have a Plague Rune Word on something like an Act 5 Mercenary, you're actually able to farm 75 of those zones just like Infinity. So Plague is the minimum amount that you're going to need to be able to farm as many places as possible on a lightning build. Now again, for poison builds, there are really only two sources of minus enemy resistance. It's either the lower resistance from a mercenary with Plague, or just being a natural necromancer and having access to your own lower res. Without any forms of minus enemy resistance, you're only able to farm 31 out of the 81 total areas. But the moment that you have a Plague on a mercenary, that number jumps up to 70 out of the 81 areas. For physical builds, your only two options here are going to be Amplify Damage as well as Decrepify. The only reason why we're not including Grim Ward here is because that can't apply to the boss of a pack. In fact, if you have no sources of minus enemy resistance at all, you are already able to farm 59 out of the 81 areas. And once you have access to Decrepify, either a Reaper's Toll on Act 2 Mercenary, Lawbringer on Act 5 Mercenary, or you are wielding one of these weapons yourself, you're actually able to farm every single area that can be terrorized that had physical immunes to start. And then lastly, you have the magic resistance in immune monsters. There's no way to break these immunities, but again, if the monster is immune to magic and is also undead, Holy Bolts, either from the skill itself or Fist of Heavens, are able to deal damage to them. Magic builds are able to farm 70 out of the 81 total zones, even if they are not able to deal damage to undead like the Paladin can. And while I didn't want to leave this over in the first sheet, something about the formatting or the equation just kept getting messed up and I couldn't figure out a way to save it. Basically, there are only 12 total monsters which are fully immune to magic damage, 10 of which are undead. So there are only two types of monsters who are magic immune who cannot be killed by a Fist of Heavens Paladin. But for people who do want more information that is specifically only relevant to the Paladins out there, here is the percentage column, column AU. That is the percentage of total monsters in the area that are undead and demons. So looking here, there are 23 zones where every single monster is an undead and a demon. And then including all the zones where at least 2/3 of the monsters are undead and demon, you'll see that there are 40 places for you to go farm. Going down the list, starting with the Amazon, physical spears on, physical bow is on, dual fire and ice bow is on, as well as lightning fury are going to be your best builds for that class because they are able to farm near 100% of the places as long as you have access to a primary damage type. For the assassin, oddly enough, a Phoenix Strike martial artist assassin is going to be able to farm every single area in the game, as well as a pure physical that also relies on using Dragon Tail to gain them access to fire damage. The physical blade traps will do really well, in addition to the normal lightning tree using Death Sentry as well as Fire Blast. Every single assassin should have access to Death Sentry. You will have at least 2 and typically 3 types of damage that you can employ in any area. For the Barbarian, honestly, they all do really well. It's very easy to add the Berserk skill onto any one of the Barbarian types other than Warcry. So I would say that just your average Berserk Barbarian, as well as Leap Attack, Whirlwind, Double Throw, especially if you use 2 elemental options like Gimmer Shred, and then Frenzy, and lastly Warcry, you'll be able to farm just about every area that becomes terrorized. For the Druid, the only build that actually suffers here would be your Pure Cold using Arctic Blast and Hurricane with a ton of ridiculous endgame gear. The Pure Fire Druid that has access to physical damage through Armageddon and Volcano, as well as Molten Boulder, is going to do really well. Pure Tornado is going to do very well, considering every single physical damage type in these zones can be broken once your Mercenary procs their Decrep, as well as Fire Claws Druid and Summoner Druid being able to rely on that cold damage from their wolves, as well as a massive amount of physical damage from the rest of their summons. For the Paladin, just about every Paladin build is going to do absolutely well. A lot of people are saying Hammerden, and while I do agree that Hammerden probably has access to most of these farming zones, even on players 8, it does run up against magic immunes. So I would say that Fist of Heavens might take the cake as long as player settings are somewhere between 1 to 5 if you're in some of those end game areas. And again, if you go with the Tribrid version where you're actually going to take only the holy damage from Fist of Heavens and then use the rest of the points to get yourself access to a pretty powerful Blessed Hammer, you can literally farm every zone in the game. For that, the Tesla Den or Dual Dream Paladin is going to do exceptionally well. And then any of the pure elemental damage types along with a physical damage Zeal build will also do fine. Necromancer builds are still just really good. You can go pure Bone Spear, pure Summon. You can try to go Elemental Summon, although I don't recommend that one. Just as long as you throw Corpse Explosion on any one of these builds, you have access to just about everything, because every Necromancer build should have at least 2 damage types available to them, and more often than not actually has 3 damage types available to them. So while I think a lot of people are looking at the Paladin thinking that it's actually way too strong, I think the real MVP here is the Necromancer. You actually have the most negative resistance available in the game, just barely beating out a pure Tesla. And then lastly, for the Sorceress, I do think that lightning damage builds, so Nova as well as pure lightning, are probably going to perform the best. Pure Blizzard is still going to do absolutely fine. Pure Meteor is going to do absolutely fine. Any of the hybrids where you're going Hydra Nova or Nova Enchantress with a massive Act 1 Mercenary to apply Exploding Arrow, or if you want to go the traditional route of Frozen Orb Fireball or Frozen Orb Meteor. I will say that on higher player count and at higher levels, builds that include Frozen Orb are really going to suffer. So I do recommend either going one of the pure elemental routes, or if you really want to hybridize, try to include a lightning based damage and then hybridizing into a secondary form of damage. But there you have it, a complete breakdown of literally every monster in the new terror zones, what can and cannot break them, what immunities that you should expect walking into those zones, and a way of personally researching what build is going to do exceptionally well, farming your areas. I just want to jump in again and say absolute huge thank you to Warren again for doing the data pull, making the initial just total structure of the data itself. I was seriously considering going monster by monster and individually recording this data, so just thank you so much. Let me know what you think down below. Is there any data that's missing or information that's missing? Is there anything else I need to cover here or anything that isn't intuitive? Again, I'm going to include a link to this sheet itself to be able to copy and paste it into your own sheet so you can do all of your own analysis if you want to. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video.